Clara Whitmore did not cry when her own father laughed and said she was too fat to love. She set down the heavy crates she had been carrying all morning, straightened her back, and looked the entire town dead in the eye. Not one single tear, just silence and something burning behind her brown eyes that nobody there was wise enough to recognize as strength. If this story of a woman who refused to break moves something in your heart, please subscribe to our channel and leave a comment telling us what city you are watching from. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. The summer of 1887 came to Harlan Creek, Montana, like it always did, hot and unforgiving, baking the dirt roads into something closer to stone than earth, turning the sky above the town square into a flat, white glare that made everyone squint and sweat and grow mean in small, quiet ways. It was a Saturday, market day, the kind of day that pulled everybody out of their houses and into the streets, whether they wanted to come or not. Because, in a town this small, staying home while the rest of the world gathered felt like admitting defeat. Clara Whitmore had been up since before sunrise. She always was. She had loaded the family wagon, checked the harness 3 times because her father never did, driven the 2 miles from the Whitmore property to Harlan Creek's Main Street, and then spent the first 2 hours of the morning carrying crates of dry goods from Henderson's General Store to the wagon, one heavy load after another, while her mother sat on the buckboard fanning herself and her father stood outside the feed store talking to men he owed money to, laughing louder than any of them, the way a man laughs when he is trying to make everybody forget something. Clara was 23 years old. She was beautiful in the way that a river is beautiful, wide and full, and carrying more depth than anyone standing on the bank could measure. She had soft brown hair that she kept pinned back because loose hair got in the way of work, warm brown eyes that caught light in a way that made people look twice even when they were trying not to, and skin the color of early morning cream. She was round in every part of her face, her shoulders, her hips, the full curve of her arms, and she moved through the world with the particular kind of careful dignity that a woman develops when she has spent years understanding that the world is watching her and waiting for her to feel ashamed. She had decided a long time ago that she would not give them that. She was hauling the last crate, a heavy one, flour and salt, and 2 bottles of medicinal liniment that clinked together every time she shifted her grip when she heard her mother's voice cut through the market noise with the precision of something that has been sharpened for years specifically to cut. Lord have mercy, Clara. You are sweating through your dress again. Clara did not stop moving. Yes, ma'am, it is hot. A proper woman does not sweat in public. Her mother's voice carried. It always carried. Dolores Whitmore had a voice built for church announcements and public corrections, and she deployed it with the confidence of a woman who had never once considered that her words might land somewhere they were not wanted. It is not dignified. I'll be finished in a moment. That's what you said 20 minutes ago. Clara set the crate down on the wagon bed, pressed her palms flat against the rough wood for just a second, and breathed. Around her, the market moved the way markets do, people talking, children running between legs, a dog barking somewhere near the butcher's stall, the smell of sawdust and horse, and something frying in a pan 2 storefronts down. Ordinary sounds, ordinary morning, the kind of morning that doesn't announce itself as the kind that changes things. Her father appeared from around the corner of the feed store with 2 other men behind him, Franklin Dole, who owned the hardware shop, and Pete Marsh, who owned nothing except opinions, which he gave freely and without invitation. Thomas Whitmore was a thin man with big hands and a permanent expression of having just been interrupted from something important. He had been telling people for 15 years that the Whitmore farm was on the verge of becoming something significant. The farm had not cooperated with this version of events. It remained what it had always been, 43 acres of reluctant soil, a house that needed new roof boards, and a family that owed money in 3 counties. He looked at Clara the way he often did, like she was a problem he had not figured out how to solve. Still at it, he said, though she was clearly finished. Just done, Papa. Franklin Dole looked her over with the particular expression of a man who has decided to find something funny. Tom, I keep telling you, girl that size ought to be charging for labor. She hauls more than Johnson's mule. Pete Marsh laughed. Clara picked up her work gloves from the wagon board and folded them carefully. She's 23, her father said, and there was something in his voice that Clara recognized the particular tone he used when he was building toward something. When he was calculating what he could say that would make the other men laugh hardest. It was the tone she had been dreading since she woke up that morning without being able to say exactly why. 23 years old and not a single serious offer, not for lack of trying. I imagine, Pete Marsh said, still grinning. Oh, we tried. Her mother's voice again, joining from the wagon seat like she had been waiting for her entrance. Her father tried, I tried. We even had that situation with the Miller boy 2 years back. But she made a small eloquent gesture with her fan. Well, the Miller boy had sense, Franklin Dole said. They all laughed. Clara stood beside the wagon and looked at a fixed point somewhere above the hardware store sign and held very still. This was the thing about being Clara Whitmore in Harlan Creek. The cruelty was never sudden. It was incremental. It was her mother mentioning her size before she had finished her first cup of morning coffee. It was her father going quiet when his friends looked at her too long. The particular silence of a man performing embarrassment for an audience. It was 15 years of small corrections and louder silences that had built themselves into something she carried in her chest, the way some people carry old injuries present always. Sharp sometimes, mostly just wait. Maybe we should just give her away, her mother said. Fanning herself. The words were light, casual. The way a person says something they have thought privately, so many times it no longer feels like cruelty to say out loud. Honestly, Thomas, maybe we ought to just find some poor soul who needs a cook and a workhorse and call it a day. The market noise around them seemed to pause. Or maybe Clara just heard it that way. Franklin Dole was looking across the street. Well, he said, and there was something building in his voice, the architecture of a joke taking shape. Speak of the poor. There's Clara turned. He was sitting outside Henderson's general store on the bench that Henderson kept there for customers, sitting with his forearms resting on his knees, turning his hat slowly in his hands, watching nothing in particular. A tall man, broader across the shoulders than he appeared at rest. He wore a plain canvas work shirt the color of old straw, faded at the elbows, and boots that had been resoled at least twice. His dark brown hair needed cutting. He had the kind of face that had been outdoors for years, angles sharpened by weather. A light beard that was more neglect than intention. Lines at the corners of his eyes that could have been from sun or from something harder to name. William Carter. Everyone in Harlan Creek knew William Carter the way they knew the names of roads they never traveled by sight and sound rather than any real acquaintance. He was the rancher from the north end of the county. Kept to himself, came into town for supplies and left without much conversation. Drove a wagon that had seen better decades. Wore clothes that looked like they had been laundered and mended rather than purchased new. The general consensus in Harlan Creek was that William Carter was a man who had missed his moment, 40 years old. Unmarried, running some small operation up in the hills that barely kept him fed. Hardworking, people allowed, decent enough, but poor. Clearly poor. The kind of poor that didn't announce itself with complaint, but simply showed in the worn-down evidence of everything he owned. Pete Marsh was already grinning. Maybe Carter would take her, he said. Her father laughed first. The sound of it went through Clara like cold water. Lord, Franklin Dole said, shaking his head with the enjoyment of a man who has stumbled into free entertainment. That'd be something, wouldn't it? Tom Whitmore's girl and the loneliest rancher in the county. He'd probably be grateful, her mother said. Still fanning, voice utterly serene. More people had drifted within earshot. This was the way of small towns jokes found their audiences, the way water found low ground. Naturally and without effort. A woman from the dressmakers had paused on the boardwalk. Two men outside the feed store had turned. A group of women near the vegetable stalls had gone quiet in the attentive way of people pretending not to listen while listening very carefully. William Carter across the street had gone still. He was not looking at them yet. Or perhaps he was, in that careful, peripheral way of a man who has learned to track things without appearing to. Clara felt the attention of the street, like a physical weight, the particular pressure of public humiliation, which is different from private pain in the way that a wound in open air is different from one beneath bandaging. Everyone watching, everyone waiting for her to cry, waiting for her to run, waiting for her face to do the thing that would make the joke complete, would confirm. For everyone gathered that, yes, this was correct. This was the appropriate response to being Clara Whitmore. This was the only ending available to a woman who looked the way she looked and came from what she came from. She picked up the empty crate she had been about to set aside. She put it down. She turned and looked at her father. Thomas Whitmore was still smiling, but there was something shifting at the edges of it, a small uncertainty. Like a man who has told a joke and is just beginning to wonder whether the punchline was as clever as he thought. "Papa," Clara said. Her voice came out even. She had not been sure it would. "Are you finished, Clara?" "Because I have finished loading the wagon." She kept her voice the particular quality of quiet that is not softness. "The flour is in the back. The salt is wrapped against moisture the way you like it. The liniment is in the cloth bag so it doesn't shift." She looked at him for a moment longer. "If you're planning to stand here another hour, I'd like to know. Because I have mending to do when we get back." Franklin Dole made a sound between a cough and a laugh. Her father's smile had gone uncertain, and then Pete Marsh made the mistake of speaking again. "Girl's got a temper on her, Tom, along with everything else." He gestured vaguely, broadly, in the way that made his meaning unmistakable. Clara set down the gloves she was still holding. She turned toward William Carter's bench across the street. He was looking at her now, with the careful, level attention of a man who had decided to stop pretending he wasn't watching. Their eyes met, and something in that look, in the simple, undisguised quality of it, the absence of pity or mockery or the complicated performing sympathy that was sometimes worse than both, made Clara cross the street. She had not planned to. She did not think it through. She simply walked, and the crowd parted, because crowds do that when someone moves with enough certainty. And then she was standing in front of William Carter's bench, and he was looking up at her from his seat with an expression she could not quite read, careful. Still not unkind. "I heard what they said," Clara told him. She kept her voice low enough that only he could hear her, or close enough to it. "And I want you to know that I am not part of that joke." She held his gaze. "I am nobody's charity. I am not property to be given or traded or laughed about in the street." William Carter was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "No, ma'am, I don't imagine you are." His voice was lower than she expected. Quieter. There was a steadiness in it that felt different from the voices she had been surrounded by all morning. No performance. No angle, no joke building behind the words. "My name is Clara Whitmore," she said. "I know," he said. "I've seen you in town before." He turned his hat once more in his hands. "William Carter." "I know," she said. "People have opinions about you." Something shifted very slightly in his expression. Not quite a smile. More like the ghost of one. "People have opinions about most." "Yes." "Are you?" He looked at her for a long moment. His eyes were dark, a deep, considered brown, and they held an expression she would later spend considerable time trying to name. Something between assessment and recognition, like a man looking at a map and finding a road he had not expected. "That," he said finally, "is a more complicated question than it sounds." "Miss Whitmore." Hines, she could hear the murmur of the crowd, the recalibration, happening as people tried to figure out what they were watching. Whether this was still funny, whether the joke had changed shape without their permission. Her father's voice, "Clara. Clara, get back here." She did not get back there. She looked at William Carter and said the thing that had been sitting in her chest all morning. The thing that had been building through every laugh and every look and every casual. Practiced cruelty until it had become too large to keep. If you need a worker, she said, I will work. I can cook. I can manage animals. I can do accounts if you have them. I am strong and I am capable and I learn fast. She did not look away from him. But I will not be given. I will not be traded. And I will not stand in this street one more minute while my own family treats me like a problem they can't sell. She held his gaze. If you need help on your ranch, I am offering it as a woman who chooses where she goes. Not as someone's leftover. The whole street was very quiet. William Carter held her eyes for a beat that stretched long enough to feel like something was being decided. Then he stood up. He was taller than she had realized, tall enough that she had to tilt her chin up slightly to keep his gaze. Which she did without hesitation. He settled his hat back onto his head. I could use help, he said. The ranch is short a hand and it's calving season. He said it simply, without drama, like a man confirming an appointment. The work is hard and the hours are long and I can't pay much right now. I'm not afraid of hard work, Clara said. No, he said, and that almost smile again. I don't imagine you are. Her mother's voice from behind her now. Higher and sharp, Clara Whitmore, you come here this instant. You are making a spectacle. Then she will be on my property, William Carter said, raising his voice just enough to carry across the street to where her family stood. He said it plainly, without aggression, simply as a statement of fact that he considered already settled. If your daughter is willing to come work an honest wage on my ranch, that is her choice to make, and she has made it. I will bring her back to town at the end of the week if she decides it isn't suitable. The silence that followed had a different quality to it. Her father had gone very still. Franklin Dole and Pete Marsh were no longer laughing. Her mother's fan had stopped moving. Clara turned and looked at her family across the street, at her father's complicated expression, at her mother's open, stunned mouth, at the crowd gathered around them, wearing the particular look of people who have arrived expecting one kind of story and have just realized they might be in a different one entirely. She felt something loosen in her chest. Not triumph. Not yet. Something more fragile than that, the tentative first breath of a woman who has been holding herself together so long she has forgotten what it feels like to simply breathe. She turned back to William Carter. I'll need to collect my things from the wagon, she said. Take your time, he said. She walked back across the street. Her father reached for her arm. Clara, this is not. I heard what you said. Papa, she kept her voice low. Not angry, there would be time for anger later. Somewhere private, somewhere it wasn't a performance. In front of the whole town. I heard what you said and I heard what Mama said, and I am tired. She opened the back of the wagon and pulled out the small bag she had packed that morning. The one she had packed without knowing exactly why. With the specific efficiency of a woman who had learned to be ready without being able to say for what. I am going to work a fair wage. I will send money when I have it. She looked at him. That was what you needed from me, wasn't it? Money. He didn't answer. She took her bag. She walked back across the street to where William Carter stood waiting beside his wagon with the particular patience of a man who has decided something and sees no reason to elaborate on it. He took the bag from her without comment and set it in the wagon bed with the same matter-of-fact ease with which he would have handled a bale of feed. He helped her up to the seat. His hand was calloused. Sure, and he released it the moment she was settled, no lingering. No particular weight to the gesture. He climbed up on the other side and gathered the reins. From behind them, across the street, she could hear the noise of the market beginning to reform, voices rising again. That particular sound of a crowd resuming itself after an interruption. The way water resumes flowing when an obstacle is cleared. But something had shifted. She could feel it even with her back turned. She did not look back. William Carter clicked his tongue at the horses and the wagon began to move. And Clara Whitmore sat straight on the bench beside a man she did not know. On her way to a place she had never been, and felt for the first time in longer than she could easily remember like she was going somewhere, rather than simply enduring where she was. They rode in silence for several minutes. The town fell away behind them, the noise of it first, then the shapes of the buildings, then the dust from the market street. Then all of it replaced by open road and the sound of the horses and the dry summer wind moving through the grass on either side of the track. It was William Carter who spoke first. "You packed a bag this morning," he said. Not an accusation, not even really a question. More like a man noting something that struck him as interesting. Clara looked straight ahead. "I did. Before any of that happened, yes." He considered this. "Why?" She was quiet for a moment. "I suppose I had been tired for longer than I knew," she said. "And I ran out of room for it this morning." He nodded once. Slowly, the way a man nods when something confirms a thing he already understood. They rode on. The road climbed gradually. Harlan Creek sat in a low valley, and the land rose as you left it, the grass getting longer and the air getting slightly cooler and the sky getting wider as the buildings and the people and the particular weight of everyone's opinions fell away behind the ridge. "You don't have to stay," William Carter said after another long silence. "I meant what I said. I can bring you back at the end of the week. Or sooner if you decide." "I know," Clara said. "I am not in the habit of—" He stopped. Started again more carefully. "I want to be clear about what I am offering. Work, fair wages, a room of your own in the house. Nothing else is expected." "Good." Another pause. "It's a working ranch. It's not easy. You already said that." "I know. I'm saying it again." She glanced sideways at him for the first time since they'd started moving. He was looking at the road ahead, hands easy on the reins. Expression the same careful, level quality it had held since she'd crossed the street. He seemed like a man who was accustomed to silence and was not uncomfortable in it, not the silence of someone with nothing to say, but the silence of someone who had learned to think before speaking, which was rarer than it should have been. "Why did you agree?" she asked. He was quiet long enough that she thought he might not answer. "Because you asked right," he said finally. She waited. "A lot of people ask for things from a place of—" He seemed to search for it. "From a place of needing to be saved. Or they ask from a place of thinking they're doing you a favor by asking." He kept his eyes on the road. "You asked like someone who had something to offer and knew it. A beat. That's not as common as you might think." Clara looked forward again. Something settled in her chest that she didn't quite know how to name. They rode another mile in silence before the road curved around a long ridge and the valley opened below them. Clara had lived in Harlan Creek her whole life. She knew the county the way you know a place you have never had reason to leave, in the way of someone who knows the shapes of the hills and the names of the roads, but not necessarily what lies beyond them. She had not known about this. She had not known that past the ridge, past the land everyone drove through without stopping, past the dry, scrubby hills that separated the North County from the south, the land changed. It became something else entirely. The valley that spread below them was wide and green and crossed by a river that caught the afternoon sun and broke it into pieces. The grass was tall, genuinely tall, the kind of tall that meant deep roots and real water. She could see cattle in the distance, not a small herd. Not the 40 or 50 head a poor rancher might scrape together. She counted in her head and gave up counting. Hundreds. At minimum. Moving slowly through the grass the way cattle do when they are well fed and unhurried. There were fences, but they were good fences, maintained ones. Not the half-fallen patchwork she had expected. There were outbuildings, several of them, and a barn that was large enough to be serious, and a house set back from the road on a rise above the river that was not grand but was substantial, 2 stories. Solid timber, real glass in the windows, a porch that ran the whole front length. Clara said nothing for a long moment. Then she said, "This is your ranch." "Yes, ma'am." She stopped. "It's bigger than it looks from town," William Carter said, with the particular understatement of a man who knows exactly how much he is understating something. You have hundreds of cattle, close to 800 head right now. More after calving season, 800. Clara looked at the valley below them, at the grass and the river and the cattle and the good solid fences and the house with real glass in its windows, and she thought about Pete Marsh saying he'd probably be grateful, and Franklin Dole laughing, and her father, her own father, turning the joke over in his hands, like something he was considering using. And she thought about the man sitting beside her, in his worn canvas shirt and his twice-resoled boots, turning his hat in his hands outside Henderson's general store, with an expression like a man waiting for something. Or for nothing, or for the particular thing he had stopped expecting. She did not say any of it. "Why does the town think you're poor?" she asked instead. William Carter was quiet for a moment. "Because I let them," he said. She waited. He clicked the horses into motion toward the descent into the valley. And when he spoke again, his voice was careful in the way of a man, choosing each word with full knowledge of its weight. "When I was younger and had less, people were straightforward with me. Honest. They said what they meant because there was nothing they wanted from me." He kept his eyes on the road. "When I started," he paused. "When things changed, it got different. People treated me differently. Started wanting things. Started being kind in the particular way people are kind when they want something back." His jaw moved. "I found I preferred the straightforward version." Clara absorbed this. "So you hide it." "I keep it quiet," he said. "It's not the same thing." "It might be," she said. He glanced sideways at her, and she met his look steadily. Something moved through his expression: surprise. Maybe. Quickly followed by something that looked like consideration. Like a man encountering an argument that had not occurred to him before, and was deciding whether it was worth engaging with. He looked back at the road. "Maybe," he said. The wagon began its descent into the valley. And below them the river caught the light, and the cattle moved through the grass, and the house on the rise waited with its solid walls and its real glass windows. And Clara Whitmore held the side of the wagon seat as they came down the slope into a place that looked nothing like what anyone in Harlan Creek believed it was. Beside a man who was nothing like what anyone in Harlan Creek believed him to be. She did not know yet what this place would become for her. She did not know what she would find here, what she would discover, and what she would lose, and what she would build from the complicated pieces of both. She did not know about the drought that was coming, or the men who would underestimate her, or the morning she would stand in the middle of a dry field, and know, with a certainty that surprised her, exactly what the ground beneath her feet was hiding. She did not know any of it yet. She knew only this: that she had picked up her bag and walked across the street. And for the first time in 23 years, the direction she was walking felt like a choice. That would have to be enough. For now it was. The horses moved down into the valley. Into the green and the light and the wide, unhurried quiet of a place that had been waiting. It seemed, for someone who finally knew how to arrive. The first morning at Carter Ranch began before the sun cleared the eastern hills. Clara heard the ranch hands moving outside before she was fully awake, boots on hard ground. The low voices of men getting themselves organized for the day. The sound of horses being led from the barn. She had slept in the room William had shown her the night before. A small room on the ground floor of the house, with a narrow bed and a window that looked out toward the barn. It was more than she had expected. She had lain awake longer than she should have, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the place settling around her. And when she finally slept, it was the sleep of someone who has put down a very heavy thing and not yet decided whether to pick it back up. She was dressed and in the kitchen before anyone else came inside. The kitchen was large and practical and had clearly been managed by a series of men who cooked the way men cook when there is no one watching adequately. Without ceremony, with a tolerance for disorder that had accumulated over years into something almost architectural. There were pans hanging on the wrong hooks. The flour was in a bag rather than a proper canister. And the bag had been rolled down and re-rolled so many times the paper had gone soft at the edges. There were coffee grounds on the shelf above the stove that had been there long enough to have left a ring. Clara found the broom first. Then she found where the actual canisters were on a high shelf, empty, apparently decorative, and transferred the flour. She got the stove lit, found the coffee, found a pan that would do for biscuits. And by the time she heard boots on the porch steps, the smell of coffee and something baking had moved through the whole ground floor of the house. The door opened. William Carter stopped in the doorway. He looked at the kitchen. He looked at her. He looked at the kitchen again. "I was going to make coffee," he said. "It's already made," Clara said. "Sit down." He sat down. Two of the ranch hands came in behind him, a young man named Eli, who looked about 17 and had the particular expression of someone who has not yet decided whether the world is friendly, and an older man named Roy, who had a gray mustache and moved with the careful deliberateness of a man who has been sore in his back for so long he no longer thinks of it as a condition. They both stopped when they saw her. Roy said nothing, but he took his hat off, which was more than she had expected. "There are biscuits," Clara said. "Sit down, both of you." They sat down. She poured coffee and put the biscuits on the table and sat down herself, because she was not interested in standing while everyone else sat. William looked at the biscuits the way a man looks at something he is trying to assess without appearing to assess it. Then he picked one up, broke it, and ate half of it in one motion. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "These are good, I know," Clara said. Roy made a sound that was not quite a laugh, but was in the same neighborhood. Eli picked up a biscuit with both hands and ate the entire thing in approximately 4 bites. That was how the first morning started, not with drama, not with declaration, but with biscuits and coffee, and 4 people sitting at a table in the early morning quiet. And Clara Whitmore understanding that whatever this place was going to become, it would be built out of exactly these kinds of ordinary moments, stacked one on top of another until they amounted to something. The trouble started 2 hours later, which was faster than she had expected, but not as fast as it could have been. She was in the barn, learning where things were stored, not because anyone had told her to, but because she had decided the night before that the only way to be useful in a place you don't know is to understand its systems before you try to improve them. She was working her way methodically along the east wall, noting what was where and why it probably wasn't working. When she heard the voices outside, there were more ranch hands than she had realized. William employed 7 men full-time, and there were 2 seasonal workers who had come on for calving. She had seen a few of them at breakfast, but not all. And now, standing in the barn doorway working out whether the harness arrangement made any sense, she became aware that several of them were gathered near the corral fence about 20 yards away. She could hear them clearly enough, not a housekeeper. That's clear enough. This was a man named Holt, who she had not been introduced to and had identified by the process of elimination. He was somewhere in his early 30s, with the confidence of someone who has been the most competent person in a room, often enough to assume it as a baseline. What is she then? Carter brought her from town. Another voice, one of the seasonal men. Something happened at the market, sounds like. I heard about that, someone else said. The Whitmore girl. Her family, a pause, and then a sound that was almost a laugh, but not quite. Lord, she can cook, said Eli's voice, somewhat defensively. She can cook, Holt repeated, and the quality of his voice made it clear what he thought of this as a qualification. That's what we needed. Another pause. She gonna ride? She gonna mend fence? She gonna help pull calves? Silence. That's what I thought, Holt said. Clara set down the length of harness she had been examining. She walked out of the barn. She crossed the 20 yards to the corral fence at a pace that was not hurried and was not slow, just steady. Purposeful, the particular pace of someone who has decided something and is in the process of acting on it. The men at the fence turned when they heard her coming. Holt did not step back, which she gave him partial credit for. She looked at him directly. He was taller than her by several inches and had the built-up physical confidence of someone who worked hard with his body every day and was accustomed to that mattering. He met her look with the particular expression of a man who is waiting to be entertained. "The harness arrangement on the east wall of the barn doesn't make sense," Clara said. "The working harnesses are hung where the mending harnesses should be. Which means every time you pull gear for the day, you're working around the stuff that should be second." "How long has it been set up that way?" Holt blinked. "Since before I started," Roy said from the edge of the group. He had materialized there quietly and was watching with the expression of a man who has been around long enough to know when something interesting is about to happen. "I'm going to reorganize it this afternoon," Clara said. "After I've had a look at what's in the supply shed. I noticed the calving supply kit was on the second shelf yesterday. It should be first shelf. Front position. You want what you need most in an emergency to be what you hit first." Nobody said anything. She looked at Holt. "What did you need?" she said. "You looked like you had a specific concern." Holt's jaw moved. "No concern," he said finally. "Good," Clara said. "Then we're fine." She turned and walked back toward the barn. Behind her, she heard Roy say something too low to catch, and then someone, she thought it was Eli, laugh. Short and surprised, she went back to work. That was the first mini-war, and she had won it on points rather than on declaration, which was the only kind of winning that actually held. The second one came at noon. She had reorganized the east wall of the barn, confirmed that the calving supply kit was in the wrong position, and corrected it. Found a calf that had gotten separated from its mother in the far pasture, and guided it back without asking for help, a small thing, but not an invisible one, and was in the middle of looking at the account books that William had left on the kitchen table, with a note that said simply, "These need attention," when Holt came into the kitchen. He looked at the account books spread open on the table. He looked at her. "Those are Carter's private books," he said. "Mr. Carter left them for me to look at," Clara said. Without looking up, he said, "They need attention." A pause. "You do accounts?" She turned a page. The books were a disaster, not dishonest, but disorganized in the way of someone who is meticulous in the field and exhausted by the time he gets to paperwork. Numbers in the wrong columns, expenses listed without dates. Several entries that appeared twice with different amounts. "Have a seat if you need something. I'll be with you in a moment." Holt did not sit down. He stood there for a moment in the particular way of a man recalibrating. And then he said, "You're not what I expected." Clara looked up at that. "What did you expect?" she asked. He was honest enough not to answer directly, which was itself a kind of answer. "The men are waiting to see what you can do," he said instead. "That's just how it is. New person on a ranch, they wait." "I know," Clara said. "So am I. What do you actually need?" "Mr. Holt, another recalibration. Then we've got a sick calf in the east barn. 3rd day of fever. Roy's been managing it, but he's not sure about the dosage on the liniment compound." Clara closed the account book. "Show me," she said. The calf was young, couldn't have been more than 2 weeks, and it was doing the particular thing sick young animals do, which was lying very still in a way that looked peaceful but was not. Roy was crouched beside it with a cloth and a small bottle of something that smelled strongly of camphor and uncertainty. Clara crouched down on the other side of the calf. She put her hand on its flank, felt the heat of the fever, then felt the rhythm of its breathing, shallow but consistent. She ran her hand along its jaw, checked its gums, pressed gently on its belly. "How much has it eaten in the last 24 hours?" she asked. Roy said barely anything. Mother stopped producing right for it. "When did the fever start?" 3 days back, like I said. 2nd day after birth. Clara was quiet for a moment, thinking. She had spent enough time around farm animals, had tended calves and lambs, and one very sick goat that her father had never noticed she'd saved to know the difference between a fever that was burning something out and a fever that was burning the animal with it. "The liniment's not what it needs," she said. You need to get warm fluid into it, not force it. Just offer it steady. Warm water with a little molasses and a pinch of salt. Every hour if it'll take it. She looked at Roy, and it needs to be warm. Not hot. The fever's already taxing it. You want to support its body temperature. Not fight it. Roy looked at her. Where'd you learn that? He said. Not unkind. My father's farm, she said. We couldn't afford to lose animals. She stood up. I'll show you how to make the mixture. It'll take 10 minutes. They went back to the kitchen together. Roy and Holt both, and Clara made the mixture at the kitchen stove and explained what she was doing as she did it. And neither of them interrupted her once. That was the second mini-war, and this one she won on knowledge. By the third day, the calf was standing. By the fourth day, it was following its mother. Roy told her this at breakfast on the fifth morning with the particular expression of a man who has revised an opinion and is being honest about it, which required a certain specific integrity that she respected. You were right about the mixture, he said. That calf's standing fine, good, she said. The harness situation in the east barn is better too. Once you use it for a week, you'll see the difference. He nodded. Already have. It was a quiet kind of acknowledgement. Not a celebration, not an apology for what had been said near the corral fence on the first day. Just a fact, stated plainly. You were right. I have updated accordingly. She could work with that. What happened on the fifth evening was different. William had been in the field all day. She knew his schedule now. Or was learning it the way you learn any complex system, by watching for patterns. He came in at the end of the day with the particular quietness he carried when something had not gone right. And she was at the kitchen table with the account books again when he sat down across from her. How are the accounts? He said. Functional now, she said. You were double entering expenses from the feed deliveries. I've corrected it back to August and retotaled the columns. You're actually in better shape than the book suggested. He absorbed this. By how much? Enough to notice, she said. I can show you the corrections if you want. He shook his head, not dismissively, but in the manner of a man who trusts what he's been told. I'll take your word. She looked at him across the table. He was tired in a way that showed through his usual steadiness, not dramatically. Not in a way he would have wanted her to notice, but she noticed it anyway because she had spent 5 days learning to read the specific language of this man's silences. What happened today? She asked. He was quiet for a moment. One of the heifers in the north pasture went down, he said. Lost the calf. I'm sorry it happens. A beat. Still. He turned his coffee cup in his hands, the same motion, she realized, that he made with his hat. Something in his hands when his mind was somewhere he didn't want it to be. 8 years ago, I lost a third of my herd to a fever that came through the valley in 6 days. Built it back. He was quiet. Doesn't mean you stop feeling it when you lose one. Clara said nothing. Because nothing was what the moment needed. After a moment, he said, You reorganized the east barn. I did. Holt said something about it. She watched his face. Did he object? No. Something shifted around the corners of his eyes that was not quite a smile. He said it was more efficient. It is, that's what he said. He looked at her. He also said you knew what you were doing with the Darcy calf. Roy did the actual work, she said. I just gave him a different direction. That's the work, William said simply. She looked back down at the account books. The credit from the Henderson account is listed as a debit on page 12, she said. That one correction alone changes the quarterly balance by $40. He was quiet for a moment. Clara, he said. She looked up. Thank you, he said. Just that, plainly, without elaboration, in the way he said most things, as if the word itself was sufficient and required no decoration to be true. She looked at him for a moment. You're welcome, she said, and went back to the books. It was the first real conversation they had. She thought later real, in the sense of two people speaking honestly about something that mattered to them both. Everything before that had been navigation. This was something different. She had not been in Harlan Creek long enough for anyone to have noticed she was gone. This thought occurred to her on the 7th morning when she was in the yard, and she heard the sound of a horse coming up the road from the direction of town. It was her brother. James Whitmore was 21 years old and had their father's hands and their mother's particular talent for arriving at the worst possible moment and presenting himself as if he were doing a favor. He rode into the yard with the expression of someone who has rehearsed what he is going to say and is still not confident in the material. He looked at Clara. He looked at the yard, at the barn, at the organization of it, at Eli carrying feed across the open ground between the outbuildings with the easy familiarity of routine. He looked back at Clara. "Mama wants you home," he said. "I know," Clara said. "She sent me to get you. I know that too." James adjusted his grip on the reins. "She's upset, James." Clara kept her voice level. "What does Mama actually need? Not what she said what she needs." Her brother looked uncomfortable in the way of someone who has been asked to think about a thing they had not planned to think about. "She needs help with the canning," he said finally. "And Papa's knee is bad again." "The canning is 3 weeks out yet," Clara said. "And Papa's knee has been bad since March. Neither of those things is why she sent you." She looked at her brother steadily. "Did she send you because she is worried about me? Or because she's embarrassed that I left?" The silence was its own answer. "Go home, James," she said. "Tell her I'm working. Tell her I'll send wages when I have them." She held his gaze. "And tell her that if anyone in this family actually wants to know how I'm doing, not what people in town are saying, not how it looks, but how I actually am, they're welcome to ask me directly." James sat on his horse for a moment. Then he said, in a different voice, quieter, with the particular quality of a younger person setting aside the script they've been given and speaking for themselves, "Are you all right?" Something in her chest shifted. "Yes," she said, "I actually am." He nodded. He turned his horse. He had ridden about 20 yards down the road when he pulled up and looked back. "You look different," he said. "Different how?" He thought about it. "Less tired," he said. Then he rode on. She stood in the yard and watched him go. And she thought about what it meant that her brother had noticed in 5 minutes what her family had apparently not noticed in 23 years, that she was tired. Specifically, in the way a person is tired who has been working hard at appearing smaller than they are. She was still standing there when William came out of the barn. He had clearly seen James arrive and leave. He said nothing about it, just came to stand a few feet away, looking in the direction her brother had gone. "Family?" he said. "My brother," she said. "My mother sent him. I see, she wants me to come home." He was quiet for a moment. "Do you want to?" Clara considered the question seriously. The way he had asked it, not as a formality but as a real inquiry, deserving a real answer. "No," she said. "All right," he said. Simple as that. He turned back toward the barn. "William," she said. He stopped. She had not used his first name before. She hadn't made a decision about it. It had just happened. In the way things sometimes do when you have been in close proximity to a person for long enough, that formality begins to feel like an affectation. He turned back. "The men," she said. "They've been watching me all week, I know. Is that," she looked for the right word, "is that yours to manage or mine?" He thought about it. She appreciated that he thought about it, rather than answering immediately. "I can tell them what I expect," he said. "But respect you can't order. It has to be earned." He held her gaze. "Sounds like you've started. Holt still doesn't like me." "Holt doesn't like much," William said. "Don't take it personally a beat. He's the best man I have. He'll come around when he's ready." Another beat. "He's watching the account situation. Roy told him what you found." Clara absorbed it. And Holt likes numbers adding up," William said. "He'll decide what he thinks on his own time. That's just how he is." She nodded. He looked at her for a moment longer than the conversation strictly required. There was something in the look, careful, as his looks always were. Nothing given away that wasn't intended, that she did not know how to classify yet. "You're doing good work," he said. "I want you to know that." She met his eyes. "Thank you," she said, same as he had said to her. Plain and undecorated. Something crossed his expression brief. Quickly managed. She thought it might have been surprise. He went back to the barn. She stood in the yard for another moment. And then she went back to work, because there was always more work. And because she was beginning to understand that this place, this wide, working, complicated place, was offering her something she had not had a name for before coming here. It was offering her the chance to find out what she was made of, in full view of people who had not yet made up their minds about her. That was not nothing. That was in fact nearly everything. The second week was when things shifted. It started with the ledger specifically, with the page she found near the back of the second account book when she was completing her correction of the quarterly figures. It was a page of numbers that did not match any of the categories in the front of the book. No headings. No dates, no explanatory notations. Just columns of figures. Very precise, running down 2/3 of the page. She stared at them for a long time. They were large. Not farm large. Not even prosperous ranch large. They were large in the way of numbers that belonged to a different conversation than the one she thought she was in. She closed the book. She sat with that closed book for a while. Then she opened the book again and looked at the numbers again, to make sure she had read them correctly. She had. She closed the book again. She thought about the valley she had seen from the ridge on the first day, the expanse of it. The cattle, the river, the good fences. She thought about William Carter sitting outside Henderson's general store in his worn canvas shirt, turning his hat in his hands with the patience of a man who is in no particular hurry. She thought about 800 cattle and a 2-story house with real glass windows and a barn large enough to be serious. She thought about what he had said, "I let them believe it," and the way he had said it's not the same as hiding it. And her own response, "Maybe it is," and the fact that he had said maybe in return, and the way that word had sat between them afterward. Unresolved. She put the account book back where she had found it. She said nothing about what she had seen, not yet. But she carried it, the knowledge of it, the way you carry something you don't know what to do with yet. Carefully, quietly, staying aware of its weight, without putting it down and without yet deciding what to build from it. The third week brought something harder. A man arrived from town, not family. Not a regular supply delivery. He rode in on a horse that was too good for casual travel, dressed in clothes that had been bought with that particular intention of looking casually prosperous. His name was Gerald Crane, and he introduced himself to Clara, who was the first person he encountered in the yard, as a business associate of Mr. Carter's. He said it with a smile that did not reach his eyes in a way that Clara recognized immediately, because she had grown up around men who smiled that way. "Mr. Carter is in the north pasture," she said. "I can send someone to let him know you're here." "That'd be fine," Gerald Crane said, looking around the yard with the particular attentiveness of a man who is making assessments. "You the new housekeeper?" "I work here," Clara said. "Right," he said, in the tone of someone who has received an answer that doesn't quite fit their question and has decided to let it go for now. She sent Eli to get William and put Gerald Crane in the front room with coffee and went back to the kitchen, where she could hear, if she paid attention, which she did, the conversation that happened when William arrived 20 minutes later. She was not eavesdropping. She was in the kitchen, which happened to share a wall with the front room. And the wall was not thick, Crane William said. And his voice had a different quality in it than she had heard before, careful in a new way, like a door being held rather than left open. The sound of Crane settling in a chair. "Good ride out. Your place is looking well. What do you need?" A small pause at the directness of this. "Just checking in. The Lander County water rights situation, I wanted to hear where you stand." "Same place I stood in March," William said. "Not interested. The offer's better now. Then it'll be better again in another season." A longer pause. "Carter, you've got water this valley needs." The drought's going to hit hard. This year, the whole county knows it. If you hold those rights, I'm going to hold those rights, William said. Same as I told you in March. There are other men interested in acquiring. Let them try. William's voice was flat. And Clara heard in it something she had not heard before, an edge that was not anger exactly, but something harder. The voice of a man who has been patient with a thing for a long time and has arrived at the far end of his patience. Is that everything? Crane's chair moved, the sound of a man standing. You know, Crane said, and his voice had changed too. The pleasant surface of it thinning. You could make this easy. Take the offer, move your operation north, let the county sort out the water management, Gerald. William's voice. Ride safe, a silence that had texture to it. Then the sound of the front door. Clara was looking at the account book when William came into the kitchen 5 minutes later. She did not look up immediately, giving him the moment to collect himself. When she did look up, his expression was back to its usual careful steadiness. But there were traces around the edges of the visit still showing. Business associate, she said, in a manner of speaking. She looked at him steadily. He wanted something you weren't going to give him. Yes. Water rights, she said. His eyes sharpened. The wall isn't thick. He was quiet for a moment. And she could see him deciding how much to say. Deciding what he owed her by way of explanation. Deciding where the line was between what was his to share and what was hers to know. She helped him decide. You don't have to explain your business to me, she said. But I want you to know that I notice things. It's how I'm built. She held his gaze. And what I notice is that there's a man who just rode a very expensive horse out from town to pressure you about something that matters a great deal to a great many people in this county. And you sent him away without a second thought. She paused. That means you have something worth protecting, and that means you might need more than just an organized barn and a corrected ledger before this season is out. The kitchen was very quiet. William looked at her with an expression she had not seen on him before, the look of a man who has spent a long time expecting nothing from anyone and has just encountered something that does not fit that expectation. The drought, he said finally. It's going to be worse than people know. I thought so, she said. The grass patterns in the south pasture. The river levels dropping faster than Roy thinks it should. He stared at her. How do you know that? I've been watching, she said simply. It's been 3 weeks. The look on his face in that moment, not quite disbelief. Not quite something she had a name for yet, but somewhere between the two and building toward a third thing was something she would remember for a long time. Not because it was grand, because it was real. Because for a moment, behind the careful steadiness and the worn canvas shirt and the quiet that he wore like a second skin, she saw a man who was genuinely surprised, not by information. By her. I have some thoughts, she said, about the water. If you want to hear them. He pulled out the chair across from her and sat down. Tell me, he said. And she did. Clara's water theory was not complicated. That was the thing about it that William kept coming to in the days after she explained it, not that it was brilliant in the way of something no one had ever thought, but that it was obvious in the way of something everyone had looked at and not seen. She had laid it out at the kitchen table with the account book pushed to one side and a piece of paper in front of her, drawing lines with a pencil stub she had found in the kitchen drawer. The river that ran through Carter Valley dropped 12 feet in elevation between its entry point at the North Ridge and the point where it curved east toward the Lander County boundary. There was a natural stone shelf underground. She had found reference to it in a surveying document she had asked Roy about, which Roy had found in the back of the supply shed, which had apparently been there for 11 years without anyone reading it closely. The shelf created a reservoir effect in the subsoil. During dry years, when the river surface dropped, the underground water didn't drop at the same rate. It lagged, sometimes by weeks, she said, if the drought hits the way it's going to, and the river drops to where I think it'll drop by August, the surface water in this valley will look depleted. But 30 feet down there's still water, William looked at the lines on her paper. "How do you get to it?" he said. "You dig a second well," she said. "Not where the current well is, further south, closer to the shelf line. And you build a collection system off the secondary drainage on the east ridge. It's not complicated. It's just work." He was quiet for a long time. "I've had surveyors out here," he said finally. "I know. Roy told me. 4 years ago." She looked at him. "Did they read the old document?" His expression answered her before he did. "I'll have someone start digging next week," he said. "Start with a test bore," she said. 20 feet should tell you if you're in the right position. If you are, expand from there. Don't commit the full labor until you've confirmed the shelf." He looked at her. "Where did you learn surveying?" he said. "I didn't," she said. "I learned to read documents carefully. That's different." She heard him repeat that line to Roy 3 days later, not knowing she was within earshot, and heard Roy make the sound he made when something struck him as both accurate and funny. The bore test happened on a Thursday, 22 feet down. They hit water. The sound of Holt's voice carrying across the yard when the first dark moisture appeared at the base of the bore, not a shout. Just the flat, emphatic statement of a man who did not permit himself to shout was something Clara heard from inside the barn, where she had been mending harness, strapping, and trying very hard not to stand outside watching. She heard it, and she let out a breath she had been holding for 3 days. Roy appeared in the barn doorway 3 minutes later. 22 feet, he said. "I heard. Holt wants to know how you knew. Tell him I read a document," she said. "Tell him it was in the supply shed." Roy looked at her with the particular expression he had developed over the past 3 weeks, a look that was something between professional respect and the particular warmth of someone who has decided to be in your corner. "He's going to ask which document," Roy said. "Then tell him to read it himself," Clara said. "It's not locked." Roy made the funny and accurate sound again and left. She went back to the harness, but her hands were shaking slightly, not from fear. From something that was the emotional opposite of fear, which did not have a name she could apply cleanly, but which felt like being right about something that mattered when it mattered. She had not told anyone about the numbers in the back of the account book. She had been carrying that for over 2 weeks now, and it had grown heavier as the days passed, not lighter. The figures she had seen did not fit any version of William Carter that the rest of the world held. They fit a different version entirely. And she had begun to assemble that version piece by piece from everything she observed. The way the ranch hands deferred to him without him asking for it. The quality of the cattle, the sophistication of the fencing system. The way Gerald Crane had ridden out with a horse, too good for casual travel, specifically to apply pressure to a man the town believed had nothing worth pressuring. She knew. She had known for 2 weeks, and she had said nothing because it was not hers to say. And because she was working out slowly, carefully, what it meant that he had chosen to show the world a worn canvas shirt and a twice-resoled pair of boots, while behind a ridge that no one apparently crossed. 800 cattle moved through a valley that belonged to him entirely. She understood the logic of it. She had said maybe it is when he said it wasn't hiding. And he had said maybe back, and she had thought about that exchange every day since. She understood the logic. She wasn't sure she forgave it yet. The drought hit Harlan Creek at the end of July, and it hit the way bad things often hit, not suddenly but in a progression. Each day a degree worse than the last, so that by the time it was fully upon them it had arrived gradually enough that people were still arguing about whether it was serious. The river dropped, not catastrophically at first, just steadily. Every day a little lower, the banks widening as the waterline retreated. The grass in the south pastures began to show the particular yellow at the tips that meant thirst rather than sun. The cattle shifted their grazing patterns, spending more time near the river bend and less time in the upper fields. Clara watched all of it and said nothing that wasn't asked of her. And worked and waited. The second well had been dug by the end of June, expanded from the test bore to a full operating well. cased and fitted with a pump that Holt had installed with the methodical competence he brought to everything. The collection system on the East Ridge had taken 2 weeks more but was functional, channeling the secondary drainage into a cistern that William had built from a design Clara had sketched on the back of an account sheet. By the time July's heat settled over the valley, like something with weight and intention, Carter Ranch had water that the surrounding ranches did not. Word reached them on a Tuesday morning via Roy, who had gone to town for supplies and come back with the news folded between mundane sentences about flour prices and a broken wagon axle at the Henderson's dock. Marsh's North herd is in trouble, Roy said, setting the flour sack on the kitchen table. River's too low for the upper pasture access. He's losing weight on the cattle. Clara looked up from the stove. Marsh lost his eastern fence line 2 seasons back, she said. He can't rotate pastures. Right, Roy said. Dunmore's in the same situation. Maybe worse. He's been talking about selling off part of the herd early. William, who had come in from the early morning ride and was sitting at the table with coffee, said nothing. His hands were around the cup, and his expression was the careful, still version that she had learned meant he was thinking several things simultaneously and had not yet decided which one to act on. And Crane, Clara said. Roy glanced at William. Crane's been riding the county, Roy said, offering to buy distressed herds at below market. Real busy this week. William set his cup down. That's what he was planning, Clara said. It wasn't a question. Drought was predictable, William said. Anyone paying attention to the water levels in March knew it was coming. Crane was paying attention, she said. Yes, and he wanted your water rights before the drought hit, she said, so he could use them to control how bad things got for everyone else. The kitchen was very quiet. You figured that out, William said. It's not a complicated scheme, Clara said. Just a profitable one. She looked at him. What are you going to do? He was quiet for a long moment. That's a question I've been sitting with, he said. She waited. There's a county meeting, he said. Thursday. The ranchers are getting together at the town hall to talk about the drought situation. Crane will be there, will you? He looked at her. I usually don't go, he said. Town meetings aren't, he stopped. They're not what a poor rancher would bother with, she said. Something moved in his expression. Something like that, he said quietly. She held his gaze. Then maybe, she said, it's time to stop being a poor rancher. The silence that followed had a particular quality not uncomfortable, but full, like a room where someone has just said something that changes the shape of the air. William looked at her for a long moment. Then he stood up, took his hat from the hook by the door and said, I'll be in the north pasture until noon. He left. Roy looked at Clara. Clara looked at the stove. Did I say the wrong thing, she said. Less to Roy than to the general air. No. After a moment. I don't think you said the wrong thing. He picked up his coffee. I think you said the right thing to a man who's been waiting a long time for someone to say it. She absorbed this. He's going to the meeting, she said. If I know Carter, Roy said. He's already decided. He just needed a minute. Thursday morning. William Carter came down to breakfast in a shirt that was not the worn canvas one. It was a plain cotton shirt, dark blue, clean and pressed, not fine. Not showy, but different. He had shaved properly. His boots were the same ones, but he had polished them. Clara was at the stove, and she registered all of this in a peripheral glance and said nothing about it. She put coffee on the table. He sat. Thank you, he said, meaning the coffee. You're welcome, she said, meaning everything else. They ate breakfast without discussing Thursday, or Crane, or water rights, or the particular weight of what was coming. They talked about the East Ridge cistern, which needed a bracket replaced, and about one of the mares who had been favoring her left front leg, and about the calving numbers for the season. It was the most ordinary breakfast Clara could remember having in years, and the ordinariness of it sat in her chest with an unexplained warmth. He rode to town. She spent the morning working and trying not to think about it, with the specific concentrated effort of someone who is thinking about it constantly. By 2 in the afternoon, she had reorganized the entire supply shed, checked every cistern bracket she could reach, and started a batch of preserves that didn't need to be started yet but gave her hands something definitive to do. He came back at 4. She heard the horse in the yard and did not go to the window, and then his boots on the porch, and then the door. She stayed at the stove. "How did it go?" she said, without turning around. He was quiet for a moment, not the considering silence, but a different one. "Crane was there," he said. "I expected that." He'd already been talking to 3 of the smaller ranchers about buying their distressed herds. Had agreements drafted, ready to sign, and the water rights. He stood up in front of the county meeting, William said, and told everyone that the solution to the drought was coordinated water management. Said there were private rights holders in the valley who were hoarding access and that the county needed to compel negotiation. Clara turned around. His expression was not angry. It was something more controlled than anger, the expression of a man who has been paying attention to a long game and has just seen the other player make the move he expected. "What did you do?" "I stood up," he said. She waited. "I told them who I was," he said. "Not the version everyone thinks. The actual version." The kitchen was completely still. "And," she said. The room got quiet, he said. There was something in his voice, not quite humor, but adjacent to it, in the way that something very difficult can have a strange quality of lightness once it's done. People have a particular expression when they realize they've been wrong about something for a long time. "I know that expression," Clara said. He looked at her. "I know you do," he said. She held his gaze for a moment. "Did they believe you?" "Holt came with me," he said. She blinked. "Holt, you told Holt first?" "Last night," William said. "I needed someone who knew the numbers to be able to confirm them if I was called on it." Something moved in his expression. He said he already knew. Said the account books made it clear to anyone who could read them. Clara looked at him. "He could read them," she said slowly. "But they were a mess." "They were," William said. "Until 3 weeks ago." He held her gaze. He said the corrected version was considerably clearer. The understanding moved through her slowly. And then all at once, Holt had seen her corrections. Holt had read the cleaned account books, and in those cleaned, corrected, clarified books, the real numbers, the back page numbers, the ones she had found and said nothing about, were considerably easier to understand. She had, without meaning to, been the one who made the truth visible. She sat down, not dramatically, just sat because her legs suggested it. "He wasn't going to say anything about it," she said. "Holt?" "He was waiting," William said. "Holt's like that. He waits to see how things develop." "And how did things develop?" William looked at her with that careful, considered expression that she had spent 6 weeks learning and still hadn't fully decoded. "He decided," William said, "that the person who organized his barn and saved his best calf and fixed the ledger that told him the truth had probably earned the right to have the truth told to her in return." Clara pressed her hands flat on the table. "He told you to tell me," she said. "He told me I should have told you weeks ago," William said. He was not wrong. The kitchen was very quiet. "You knew I'd found the numbers," Clara said. "Not a question. I suspected," William said. "You stopped asking about the accounts in detail around the 3rd week. You already had the answers you were looking for. And you said nothing." "And you said nothing," he said. "We were both waiting." She looked at him across the table, this man who had sat outside Henderson's general store in a worn canvas shirt and let the whole world assume he had nothing. Who had bought a woman out of a street joke, not from pity, but from something more complicated than pity. Who had given her a room of her own and fair wages, and the space to prove something she had been trying to prove her whole life, without anyone giving her the room for it. "Why didn't you tell me?" she said. He was quiet for a long moment. "Because," he said carefully, "I needed to know if it would change things." She frowned. "Change things how?" "The way it changes everything," he said. "With everyone. When people know." He looked at his hands for a moment, then back at her. "You came here because you had something to offer and you knew it. You didn't come here because of what I had. You came in spite of what everyone thought I had." He held her gaze. "I needed to know if that was still true once you knew the truth." Clara looked at him. "And now," she said. "And now," he said, "I'm telling you." The weight of it settled over the table between them, not heavy in the crushing way, but substantial, the way the truth is when it finally takes up its actual space after being held smaller than it was for too long. "Gerald Crane," she said finally, because she needed solid ground and work was always solid ground. "What happened at the meeting after you stood up?" He tried to reframe it, William said. "Said I was a wealthy landowner with no obligation to the community. Said the county's interests and mine were opposed." A pause. "He's not wrong that I have more than most, but he is wrong about the obligation." "What did you say?" "I offered the water access," William said. "Not sold, not negotiated, offered it to every rancher in the valley. Through the drought, at cost for infrastructure." He watched her face. "On the condition that Crane's agreements with the smaller ranchers were voided." Clara's mouth opened slightly. "He accepted that condition?" "He had no choice," William said. Once the room understood what he'd been planning, buying distressed herds cheap while holding the water situation, as occurred, they weren't going to let his agreement stand. "How much did you offer?" she said. He told her. She was quiet for a moment. "That's significant," she said. "Yes," he said. "You'll take a loss this season." "Not as much of one as my neighbors will if I don't," he said simply. She looked at him. She thought about a man who sat outside a general store in a worn shirt and boots, would twice, and let people call him poor because he preferred the version of the world where no one wanted anything from him. They thought about that same man standing up in a county meeting and telling the truth about who he was, and then immediately using that truth to protect people who had dismissed him for years. "They laughed at you," she said. "At the market. Some of those same men. I know. And you're going to give them water access anyway." "It's not about them," he said. "It's about the valley, the animals in it, the families that depend on it." He looked at her steadily. "The people who laughed at me will have to live with that. I can't make them feel it. I can make sure their cattle don't die." She sat with that for a moment. Then she said, "Roy told me once that you lost a third of your herd 8 years ago." "I did. And you rebuilt it. Because someone helped you with water access." He looked at her. And in the look was the answer before he said it. "Because a neighbor to the north gave me access through his property to the upper creek. Man named Alderman. He died 2 years later. I never had a chance to." He stopped. His jaw moved. "I never had a chance to return it." The kitchen was very quiet. "This is for him," Clara said. William didn't answer right away. "Partly," he said finally. She nodded. Outside, the afternoon wind moved through the dry grass of the south pasture, and the valley sat under the hard summer sky, and 800 cattle grazed on land that had water when the rest of the county was running dry. And somewhere between the account books and the bore well, and a kitchen table covered in a map drawn with a pencil stub, something had shifted in the particular geography of Carter Ranch that had nothing to do with water tables or surveying documents. It had to do with two people who had both spent a very long time allowing the world to see a smaller version of themselves. And what happens when they stop? Clara stood up. She went to the stove and put on fresh coffee. Because it was 4 in the afternoon, and there was still work to be done, and people would be hungry, and the evening did not wait for anyone's realizations to finish arriving. "The Marsh Ranch," she said, with her back to him. "Measuring coffee grounds. When they come to access the water, they'll need a guide for the East Channel." "Roy knows it best, I'll tell him," William said. "And the Dunmore family," she said. "They have a girl of 12 who helps with the cattle. When they bring their herd through, make sure someone explains the system to her directly. Not just the father," William said. "Because she'll remember it," Clara said. "And because it matters. When you're 12 and no one explains things to you. If someone does." She did not turn around. "All right," William said quietly. She poured the water. Behind her, she heard him stand up, heard the scrape of the chair. Heard him cross to the door. "Clara," he said. She turned. He was standing in the doorway with his good blue shirt and his polished boots and an expression she had never seen on him before, not the careful steadiness. Not the almost smile, not the considering look. Something more open than any of those. Something that looked like a man arriving somewhere he had not been sure he would reach. "I'm glad you crossed that street," he said. She looked at him. She thought about the crates she had set down in the dust. She thought about the sound of her father's laugh. She thought about a bench outside a general store and a man turning his hat in his hands and eyes that held no pity and no performance. "Just attention," she said. He held her gaze for one more moment. Then he went back out to work, and she turned back to the coffee. And outside the valley held its water beneath the dry summer ground, like a secret that was only a secret until someone read the right document and knew where to dig. She was smiling before she realized it. Not the careful kind. Not the kind she had worn in Harlan Creek like armor. The other kind. The kind that happens when something you have been waiting for, without knowing you were waiting, finally arrives. Quiet and solid and entirely real, and you understand that this is what it was supposed to feel like all along. The ranchers started arriving on a Friday. Not all at once, that would have been too easy. Too organized, too much like a thing that had been planned, rather than a thing that had become necessary. They came in ones and twos, the way people come, when pride is still partly in the way and they haven't yet decided how much of it they're willing to set down. Pete Marsh came first, which surprised everyone, including Pete Marsh, who had spent the better part of 3 weeks telling anyone who would listen that Carter's water offer was probably some kind of scheme. He arrived in the early morning with 2 of his ranch hands and a herd of 40 cattle that were thinner than they should have been. And he sat on his horse in the yard of Carter Ranch with an expression that was working very hard to look like something other than relief. Clara was the first person he saw. She had been in the yard since before sunrise, coordinating with Holt about which pastures had the capacity for additional cattle and which water access points could handle increased traffic without damaging the channel banks. She had a piece of paper in her hand with numbers on it and a pencil behind her ear, and she was in the middle of something to Holt when Marsh rode in. Holt saw him first and went quiet. Clara turned. Pete Marsh looked at her from his horse. He had the specific expression of a man who has said something publicly that he now regrets and knows regret is insufficient, and does not know what the sufficient thing would be, and has arrived somewhere he needs to be anyway, despite not knowing how to arrive correctly. "Miss Whitmore," he said. "Mr. Marsh," she said, a pause. "I heard Carter's offering water access," he said. "He is," she said. "East Channel is your best route for this size of herd. I'll have Eli show your men the way." She looked at the cattle. When did they last drink properly? Marsh's jaw tightened. Not at her, at himself, she thought. At the particular discomfort of being asked a practical question by someone you have wronged and who is nonetheless helping you. 2 days, he said. Then we'll move them to the channel first before settling the grazing arrangement, she said. She turned to Holt. East Channel, full access, Marsh herd. Tell Eli. Holt went without a word. Clara looked back at Marsh. He was looking at her with an expression she did not have an immediate name for, not apology. Because apology would have required him to say something. And he wasn't saying something. Not gratitude either. Not exactly. Something between the two, compressed by a man's particular difficulty with both. Your cattle will be fine, Mr. Marsh, she said, not coldly. Just plainly. Go get some water yourself. The kitchen's open. She turned back to her paper. Behind her, she heard the sound of Marsh dismounting. And then his boots on the ground, heading toward the house. And she thought, that is enough. Not forgiveness. She was not in the business of distributing forgiveness on William's behalf. But enough for now. Franklin Dole arrived by noon with a much bigger problem. It wasn't his herd was manageable, smaller operation. Adequate for the water access they could provide. The problem was what he told William when he arrived. And what William brought to Clara 20 minutes after that. He says Crane is planning to challenge the county meeting decision, William said, standing in the kitchen doorway with his hat in his hands. Claims it wasn't a legally binding agreement. Says the water rights were never officially part of the county's authority to negotiate over. Clara set down her coffee. Is he right, she said. Partially, William said. The meeting wasn't a formal proceeding. The agreements Crane was voiding were informal as well. So that cuts both ways. But the water rights themselves, he stopped. He's right that they're privately held. The county can't compel me. But he can't compel me either. Then what's the problem? He's filed a petition, William said, with the territorial court, claiming that private water rights holders in drought conditions have a public obligation to make access available at regulated prices. If the court agrees, the rights wouldn't be mine to offer freely. They'd be priced and regulated by the territory. Clara was quiet for a moment. And at regulated prices, she said slowly, the smaller ranchers couldn't afford the access. At the prices Crane would lobby for, William said. No, so he doesn't need to buy the rights, she said. He just needs to get them regulated in a way that prices out everyone except him. That's what Dole thinks he's planning, William said. She looked at him. When is the court date? 3 weeks, he said. Territorial circuit comes through Harlan Creek in 3 weeks. 3 weeks. She picked up her coffee, found it had gone cold, put it back down. You need a lawyer, she said. I need more than a lawyer, William said. I need documentation. The water rights have been in dispute before 20 years ago. Before I acquired this land, there was a prior case. If I can find the records from that case and establish that the rights were clearly adjudicated as private, it weakens Crane's argument considerably. Where are the records? That's the problem, he said. The county clerk's office. Harlan Creek. She understood the problem immediately. Going to the county clerk's office in Harlan Creek meant William Carter, the man who had just revealed himself to be the wealthiest rancher in the county, walking into the same town where 3 weeks ago he had been the punchline of a joke involving Clara Whitmore's weight and marriageability. The town would have reconvened its opinion of him by now. People would have things to say. People always had things to say. I'll go, she said. He looked at her sharply. Clara, it's a public record request, she said. Anyone can make it. You send me with a written authorization from you. I request the records, I bring them back. She held his gaze. And I am already familiar with the experience of walking into Harlan Creek and having people have opinions about me. It won't be new. He was quiet for a moment. That's not a small thing I'm asking, he said. You're not asking, she said. I'm offering. She picked up her pencil. Write the authorization. I'll go tomorrow morning. He looked at her with the expression she had been slowly learning to read over these weeks, the one that appeared when something she did or said moved through his careful steadiness and registered somewhere deeper than he typically showed. All right, he said. He wrote the authorization that evening. Clean formal language, his signature at the bottom. Witnessed by Roy. He handed it to her at the kitchen table without elaboration. She took it. Their fingers did not touch, or they did briefly at the edge of the paper, and neither of them mentioned it. Be careful, he said. Be useful while I'm gone. Something crossed his face that was unmistakably. Finally, actually a smile, brief, contained but real. She went to Harlan Creek the next morning. Roy drove her in the smaller wagon. He had offered without being asked, which she had accepted without argument. Because Roy's company was the specific kind, quiet, undemanding, present, that made the long drive feel like less of a thing to get through. They were 2 miles from town when Roy said, You know people are going to talk. I know, Clara said. About Carter. About you. About both of you together, I know that too. He was quiet for a moment. You ready for that? She thought about it honestly. I've been talked about my whole life, she said. The content changes. The talking doesn't. Roy nodded slowly. Fair enough. The town was exactly as she had left it. This was the thing about small towns, they had a particular quality of absolute continuity. As though nothing that happened in the external world had the power to rearrange the way the light fell on the main street, or alter the specific smell of sawdust and horse, and the frying pan 2 storefronts down. It was both reassuring and terrible, depending on what you needed from a place. People noticed her. She had expected that. What she had not quite expected was the specific quality of the noticing, not the old kind. The dismissive peripheral awareness of a person not worth looking at directly. But something more attentive than that. More complicated. She went to the county clerk's office and stated her business to the clerk. A thin man named Abbott, who had held the position for 15 years and had the particular energy of someone who loves documents the way some people love music, not as tools, but as things of inherent value. She presented William's written authorization. Abbott read it twice. Carter Ranch water rights records, he said. Prior case. He looked up at her over his reading glasses. That'd be from 1867. Before Carter's time. Yes, she said. Is it accessible? Everything's accessible, Abbott said, with the mild pride of a man in charge of everything. Give me 20 minutes. She waited. She was in the waiting chair outside Abbott's office when the door to the clerk's building opened and her mother walked in. Of all the ways Clara had imagined this going, this was not one she had specifically prepared for. Dolores Whitmore stopped in the doorway. Clara stood up. They looked at each other. Her mother was wearing her good visiting dress, which meant she had been somewhere public and important, and was on her way back, or had planned to be somewhere and changed her plans when she saw the Carter wagon outside the clerk's office. Knowing her mother, either was possible. Clara, her mother said. Mama, Clara said, a beat. You look well, her mother said. The words had the particular quality of something that has surprised the speaker on the way out. I am well, Clara said. Her mother came into the room and sat down in the other waiting chair, which was not something Clara had expected. She had expected a conversation in the doorway, something managed and brief and controlled. The sitting down suggested something longer. James said you looked different, her mother said. James came to bring me home, Clara said. I didn't go. I know. Her mother's fan was in her hands, but she wasn't using it, which was unusual. I know that too. Dolores Whitmore looked at her hands. She was not a woman who looked at her hands. She was a woman who looked at the room, at the other people in it, at whatever position was most strategic. Looking at her hands meant something was happening below the usual surface. People are talking, her mother said. About Carter. About what he revealed at the county meeting. I imagine they are, Clara said. They're also talking about you, her mother said. About what you do on that ranch, the water, she paused. Abigail Henderson told me you were the one who found the underground source. I read a document, Clara said. Roy showed me where it was. Clara. Her mother's voice changed, not softer exactly, but different. Less performed, more like a woman and less like a position. Why didn't you tell us? About Carter, about what that place actually was. Clara looked at her mother. I didn't know at first, she said. And when I found out, I wasn't sure it was mine to tell. She held her mother's gaze. And Mama, if I'm honest, I wanted you to ask about me. Not about what I'd found or what I was near or what it might mean for the family. She paused. James asked if I was all right. That was the first time anyone in our family asked that. Her mother was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice had something in it that Clara had not heard before, not an apology. Because Dolores Whitmore's relationship with apology was as complicated as anyone's. But something adjacent, a creak in the wall, where before there had been nothing but solid surface. Are you all right? She said. Clara looked at her. Yes, she said. I actually am. Abbott came back with the records before either of them had to figure out what to say next. And Clara took the folder, thanked him, and stood up. Her mother stood too. They walked out together. Not arm in arm, not that. Not yet, maybe not ever in that particular way. But together. side by side, out into the flat summer light of Harlan Creek's Main Street. At the wagon, her mother stopped. "He's a good man," she said. Not a mother's calculation, not is he wealthy, is he suitable. What does this mean for us? Just the question, plain. Clara thought about a man standing up in a county meeting and telling the truth about who he was so he could protect people who had dismissed him. She thought about water offered freely and a girl of 12 being explained things directly because someone believed she would remember. "Yes," she said, "he's a good man." Her mother nodded once. "Then don't make the same mistake I made," she said quietly. "Don't wait until the practical things are settled to say what's true." Clara looked at her mother. For a moment she saw the woman behind the fan and the visiting dress, and the voice that carried a woman who had probably once known what it felt like to have something true she wanted to say, and had waited too long to say it, and had spent 20 years being practical instead. "All right," Clara said. She got in the wagon. Roy drove them back without asking what had happened. He could read the quality of a silence. She had the records. She read them on the way home, the 1,867 case, the territorial adjudication. The clear and documented language of private water rights established and confirmed through proper legal process. It was exactly what William needed. She was sure of it. What she was less sure of, what sat in her chest beside the folder of records with a different weight, was what her mother had said. Don't wait until the practical things are settled. She was thinking about this when they came over the ridge and the valley opened below them. And she was not prepared even after 3 months. She was still occasionally not prepared for the way it looked. All that green against the dry summer air, the river still running, the cattle in the far pasture. Home, some part of her said. Before she had authorized it to say anything, she filed the thought and went back to the records. The next 2 weeks were the most compressed of her life. William's lawyer, a man named Fletcher, who had ridden up from the county seat and had the energetic precision of someone who is very good at what he does and knows it without needing to announce it, spent 3 days at Carter Ranch going through everything Clara had assembled. He read the 1,867 records. He read the current account books, the corrected versions. He interviewed Roy and Holt about the water system installation and the drought conditions. He interviewed Clara last. She sat across the kitchen table from him on a Tuesday evening with William beside her, not beside her the way a husband sits beside a wife, but beside her the way a person sits beside someone they trust, and answered Fletcher's questions directly and completely, without deflecting and without over-explaining. Fletcher was quiet for a moment when she finished. Then he said to William, "Where did you find her?" "She found herself," William said. "I just provided the location." Fletcher looked between them with the expression of a man who has assessed a situation accurately and filed it under "not my business." "The 1,867 records are strong," he said. "Combined with the installation documentation for the new well, and the channel which demonstrates that Carter has been actively developing his water access rather than hoarding it, I think we have a solid case." He paused. "Crane's argument depends on showing that the rights are being used in ways contrary to public interest. The evidence shows the opposite." "He'll pivot," Clara said. Both men looked at her. "He pivots when he's losing," she said. "He did it at the county meeting. He'll do it in court." She looked at Fletcher. "He'll try to make it about Carter's disclosure, why he kept his wealth hidden. Whether that secrecy implies something about his character or his intentions." Fletcher tapped his pen on the table. "She's right," he said to William. "I know," William said. "Then we need to address it preemptively," Fletcher said. "Not defensively, that looks like guilt. We address it as context. The reasons for the privacy, the consistency of behavior toward neighbors and community." He looked at Clara. "The water offer is the best evidence. That's not the behavior of a man who's been hiding resources for malicious purposes." "Use the alderman story," Clara said. William looked at her. "The neighbor who gave you access 8 years ago," she said. "When you lost the third of your herd. Use that story." It explains the water offer better than any legal argument will. She held his gaze. It tells the court who you are. He was quiet for a long moment. That's private, he said. I know, she said. That's why it'll be believed. Fletcher pointed his pen at her. She is correct. William looked at the table. She watched the slight movement of his jaw, the shift in his expression, as he worked through the particular difficulty of a private man being asked to make the private thing public, not for show, not for strategy, but because it was true, and true things were persuasive, in the way that strategies often weren't. All right, he said finally. The night before the court date. Clara could not sleep. She lay in her room, the small room on the ground floor. The one that had been hers since the first night. The one she had come to think of as simply hers, in the way a space becomes yours, not by declaration but by daily occupation, and she stared at the ceiling and thought about everything that could go wrong. She had been useful. She had assembled the records and corrected the books and found the water and managed the ranch hands and organized the supply shed, saved a calf and reorganized a barn, and driven to town and faced her mother and sat beside a lawyer in a kitchen and said the things that needed saying. She had been so occupied with being useful that she had not spent much time with the other thing, the thing that had been building in her chest for 3 months, the way the underground water built beneath the dry season's surface, present and pressurized, and looking for the right place to emerge. She was in love with William Carter. This was not a revelation. It was more like an arrival, the moment when something that has been approaching for a long time finally covers the last distance and stands in front of you. And you understand that it has been coming for quite a while, and you have been looking at other things. She was in love with him, in the particular way that happens when you have watched someone be exactly who they are, under multiple kinds of pressure, and found that every version of them, under every kind of pressure, was the same person, consistent. Honest, quiet, and good. She was also very specifically afraid, not of him, of the shape that the thing between them had, the shape that her mother had named without quite naming it, and that Fletcher had clocked with his efficient lawyer's assessment, and that Roy had probably understood for weeks, in the way Roy understood most things before anyone said them out loud. She was afraid of the version where he offered her something out of gratitude, out of proximity, out of the particular way that people who spend enough time together in enough shared difficulties start to feel like they belong to each other regardless of whether they have actually chosen it. She was afraid of being chosen by default. She had spent her entire life being the thing left over when other options were exhausted. She would not become that again, not even with someone she loved, not even with someone she trusted. She needed it to be a choice. A real one, made with full information by a person who understood what he was choosing. This was what she was thinking about when she heard his footsteps in the hallway. He stopped outside her door. She sat up. She waited. He knocked, not tentatively but quietly. The knock of someone who is not sure if you're awake and doesn't want to disturb you if you're not. She crossed the room and opened the door. He was in the dark hallway in his work clothes. Hat absent, hair not yet in order for the morning. He looked tired in the way of someone who also had not slept. The lamp was on, he said. I couldn't sleep, she said. Neither could I. They looked at each other in the doorway. The case is good, she said. Fletcher thinks. I'm not here about the case, he said. She went still. He had the expression she had never seen before on him, not the careful steadiness, not the almost smile, not the considering look, not even the open surprised look from the evening after the county meeting. This was something else. This was a man who had made a decision and was in the process of standing by it, which is a different thing from arriving at a decision. And harder. I have been trying, he said, to find the right time for this. And I have concluded that I have been looking for the right time specifically because I was afraid of the wrong answer, which is not a good reason to wait. Clara did not move. I know what this looks like, he said. I know the version where a woman comes to work on a man's property, and 6 months later he develops feelings, and the whole thing looks like convenience or proximity or gratitude dressed up as something more important. He held her gaze. I want you to know that I know how it looks, and I want to tell you that what it actually is, what this actually is, for me is not any of those things. She was very still. From the day you crossed that street, he said, you have shown me what it looks like when a person knows what they're worth and acts from that knowledge rather than from fear of other people's opinions. He paused. I have been alone a long time, not lonely in the way that needs fixing immediately, just alone. In the way of someone who got used to it and stopped expecting different. Another pause. And then you showed up in my kitchen before sunrise and told me to sit down. And you have been something I did not know I was waiting for. And I am saying this now, the night before the court date. Because I realized tonight that waiting for the right time means waiting for a time that doesn't exist, and I'm done waiting. The hallway was completely silent. Clara looked at him for a long moment, at this man in his work clothes in the dark hallway. Tired from not sleeping, hat missing, saying true things in the particular direct way of someone who has decided the careful version isn't sufficient. She thought about her mother's words, don't wait until the practical things are settled. She thought about what she had understood in the dark of her room an hour ago, that she was afraid of being chosen by default. That she needed it to be real. She looked at him and understood, with the specific clarity that comes at certain moments, that this was venience, not proximity, not gratitude in a dress coat. This was a man who had shown her exactly who he was for 3 months under conditions that revealed things, and who was now standing in a hallway saying so. She could let the fear make the decision. Or she could make it herself. I need to tell you something, she said. He waited. I am not going to say yes because you're wealthy, she said. I am not going to say yes because you gave me a place to go when I needed one. I am not going to say yes because the town will think it makes sense, or because my family will be relieved, or because it is the practical resolution to a situation that started in front of Henderson's general store. He held her gaze without flinching. I know, he said. I'm telling you the reasons I am not saying yes, she said. So that the reason I am saying yes is clear, he went very still. I am saying yes, she said, because you are the first person in my life who looked at me, all of me. Exactly as I am, and waited. You waited to see what I could do. You gave me room to do it. You told me the truth when it was heard, and you heard the truth when I said it, and you stood in a county meeting in a good shirt you hadn't worn in years, and you told the whole room who you were, because I told you it was time. She looked at him steadily. I am saying yes because I love you, and because I know I actually know that is the only reason I'm saying it. The hallway held them both in its quiet. William Carter looked at her, the way a man looks at something he was not certain he would reach and has reached. Clara, he said. Don't make a speech, she said. I already made one. Just tell me what you want to say. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said simply, I love you too, I have for a while. I was working up to the courage. She looked at him. That took you 3 months, she said. I'm a slow starter, he said. She laughed. It surprised her, the laugh, the clean, uncomplicated sound of it in the dark hallway. The way it felt in her chest. Not the careful kind of laugh. The real kind. He was smiling, actually smiling, not the almost version but the full version. And it changed his whole face, in the way that things seen fully, for the first time, change everything around them. Tomorrow, she said, bringing them back to solid ground, because the morning was coming whether they were ready or not. You tell the alderman's story. You tell Fletcher we'll be ready by 9. And you let me sit where I can see Crane's face when the 1,867 records are entered. You want to see his face? William said. I want to see the moment he understands it's over, she said. I have earned that. He looked at her with the full smile still in place. Yes, ma'am, he said. She went back into her room. She closed the door. She stood in the dark for a moment and pressed her hand flat against her sternum. Over the place where 3 months of building had just arrived at the thing it had been building toward. Solid and warm and entirely real. Then she went to bed. Tomorrow was going to require everything she had. She planned to be ready. She slept 4 hours and woke up certain. That was the thing she noticed first, not nerves. Not the churning uncertainty she had half expected after everything that had happened in the hallway. But a clean, settled certainty, the kind that lives in the body rather than the mind. She had said what was true. He had said what was true. The morning had come anyway, the way mornings do, indifferent to personal significance. And there was work to be done. She was in the kitchen before anyone else. Same as always. Coffee on. Biscuits made. The folder of records sitting on the table beside her cup where she had placed it the night before, the 1,867 documents. Fletcher's notes, the water system installation records. The corrected account books marked at the relevant pages. She had organized it all by argument order, the way Fletcher had laid out his case the previous evening, so that anything he needed was findable in under 30 seconds. She heard William's boots on the stairs at 5:30. He came into the kitchen and stopped when he saw the folder, organized and ready on the table. He looked at it. He looked at her. "Good morning," he said. "Good morning," she said. "Sit down, the biscuits are hot." He sat down. They ate without mentioning the hallway, which was not avoidance. It was the particular communication of two people who have said the important thing and understand that the important thing does not require constant revisiting to remain true. It was there, between them, solid and acknowledged. And the biscuits were hot, and Fletcher would arrive at 8. And that was where the morning's attention needed to go. Roy appeared at 6, then Eli, then Holt. Holt looked at the organized folder on the table. He looked at William. He looked at Clara. "Fletcher's going to need that in argument order," Holt said. "It is in argument order," Clara said. Holt picked it up. Went through it, set it back down. "Good," he said. Just that. Coming from Holt, it landed like a citation. Fletcher arrived at 7:50, 20 minutes early, which told Clara everything she needed to know about how seriously he was taking the day. He reviewed the folder, made 2 small adjustments to the page order that Clara conceded were correct, and then went through the argument with William one final time at the kitchen table, while Clara listened and Holt stood in the doorway with his coffee and Roy pretended to be interested in something outside the window. "The alderman story," Fletcher said. "Tell it the way you told me. Don't embellish. Don't explain what it meant. Just tell it and let them understand it themselves." "All right," William said. "And if Crane pivots to the disclosure question, let him," Clara said. Fletcher looked at her. "The pivot is a gift," she said. "If he makes the argument about why Carter kept his wealth private, he opens the door to why, and the why is the whole case." She looked at Fletcher. "You want him to pivot." Fletcher looked at her for a moment. He said. He snapped his case closed. "Let's go." The Territorial Circuit Court convened in Harlan Creek's Town Hall, the same building where the county meeting had happened 3 weeks earlier, though its configuration was different today. The judge's table had been placed at the front with the formal authority of the court, and the benches were arranged for an audience. And there was an audience. Because small towns treat a court date the way they treat a market day, as an occasion that pulls everyone out of their houses, whether they plan to come or not. Clara had not expected quite so many people. She sat in the second row with Roy beside her, which had been William's quiet arrangement, not the front row, which would have looked like theater, but close enough to matter. She had her hands in her lap and her back straight, and she looked at the room with the steady, organized attention she brought to every situation that required her best. Gerald Crane was already seated at the petitioner's table when they arrived. He had a lawyer of his own, a man from the county seat, better dressed than Fletcher, which was not the same as better prepared. He had a stack of documents and an expression of practiced confidence, the specific confidence of a man who has run this kind of operation before and believes he knows how it ends. He looked at Clara when she came in. She looked back at him. Neither of them said anything. The judge was a man named Hartwell, 60. precise, with the expression of someone who has heard every possible version of every possible dispute and has arrived at the permanent state of finding people predictable without finding them boring. He called the proceedings to order with the efficient economy of a man for whom time is a serious value. Crane's lawyer went first. He was good. Clara gave him that. He framed the argument cleanly: drought conditions, public necessity, private water rights holders whose silence about their capacity created a false impression of scarcity, the territory's interest in equitable resource distribution. He entered the drought data, the river level records, the cattle loss figures from the smaller ranches. He made it sound like a matter of obvious public welfare. He did not mention Clara. He did not mention the water offer. He did not mention the county meeting. This was, Clara realized, a strategic choice. If he mentioned the water offer, he had to explain why it wasn't sufficient, which was complicated. Better to pretend it hadn't happened and argue the underlying rights question directly. She watched Fletcher note this with a small movement of his pen. Then Fletcher stood up. He was quieter than Crane's lawyer, less polished in the performative sense, but he had the particular quality of someone who knows exactly where he is going and is not in a hurry because he knows he will get there. He entered the 1,867 records first. He walked Judge Hartwell through the adjudication, the original dispute, the territorial decision, the clear and unambiguous language of private rights established through proper legal process and never subsequently challenged. He did it methodically, without drama, the way you demonstrate something true. You show it and you let it be seen. Crane's lawyer objected twice. Both objections were overruled. Then Fletcher said, "I'd like to call William Carter." William walked to the front of the room. Clara watched him, watched the room. Watch him. The room was full of people who had revised their understanding of this man 3 weeks ago and were still in the process of deciding what the revision meant, whether it changed their assessment of him, and in which direction. Fletcher asked him about the water rights, about the installation of the new well and the East Channel, about the county meeting and the offer. William answered everything plainly. No elaboration, no performance, just a man answering questions accurately. Then Fletcher said, "Mr. Carter, why did you make the water access offer to the county's ranchers?" And William told the alderman's story. He told it the way Fletcher had asked him to, without embellishment, without explanation of what it meant, just the facts of it. A third of the herd gone, a neighbor named Alderman who had water access and gave it without being asked. The season that saved the ranch, Alderman dying 2 years later. The debt that never got repaid. "I've had the means to build that water system for years," William said. "I built it this season because the drought was coming and I could see it. I offered the access because there are families in this valley who are in the position I was in 18 years ago. And a man named Alderman helped me, and I never got the chance to return it." He paused. This 17 years late. But here, the room was quiet. Not the polite quiet of people being appropriately respectful in a courtroom. The real quiet, the kind that happens. Something's been said in a room and everyone present feels the truth of it land. Clara looked at Crane. His lawyer was writing something on his notepad. Crane himself was looking at the table with the expression of a man recalculating. Fletcher sat down. Crane's lawyer stood up for cross-examination. He was good, and he pivoted exactly as Clara had predicted. "Mr. Carter," he said, in the pleasant tone of someone establishing a position before attacking it, "you've testified about your motivations for the water offer. I'd like to ask about a different matter. You've been a property owner in this county for over 15 years. Is that correct?" "Yes," William said, "and for those 15 years, you chose not to disclose to your community, your neighbors, the county, the true extent of your holdings." "I didn't hide anything," William said. "I didn't publish it. There's a practical difference between privacy and active concealment, isn't there?" And yet the county has operated for 15 years on the assumption that you were a man of modest means. Would you say that assumption served your interests? Fletcher started to rise. William said yes. Fletcher sat back down, the room shifted. Crane's lawyer looked like a man who has just been handed something he didn't expect. Yes, he said. You agree that this assumption served your interests. It did, William said. When people thought I had nothing, they talked to me straight. They said what they meant because there was nothing they wanted from me. He looked at the lawyer directly. When people know you have something, they want it. They're kind in the particular way of people who are being kind because they want something back. I found I preferred the straight version. A pause. So your privacy was self-serving, the lawyer said. My privacy was self-protective, William said. There's a difference. He held the lawyer's gaze. I never claimed to be poor. I never signed a document saying I was poor. I wore old clothes and drove a modest wagon, and people decided what they decided. I didn't correct them. That's not the same as lying. Crane's lawyer tried to press further. William answered every question with the same calm. Direct accuracy. He did not become defensive. He did not become emotional. He was simply, consistently, exactly who he was, under questioning that was designed to make him appear to be something else. And the consistency was itself the argument. After the fourth question, Clara watched the lawyer's strategy begin to lose its shape. You can't make a man look evasive when he answers everything directly. You can't make him look dishonest when every answer is factually accurate. And you cannot make the room feel like he's hiding something when he has already said the most private thing, Alderman. The debt, the return of it without being asked. The pivot had been a gift. Exactly as Clara had said. Fletcher's redirect was brief. 2 questions. The second one was, Mr. Carter, in the 15 years you have owned this land, has any neighbor or community member ever come to you in genuine need and been turned away? William said, no. Fletcher said, thank you. No further questions. Judge Hartwell called a recess. Clara stood up and Roy stepped back to let her move. And she walked to the back of the room because she needed to be moving, and standing still was not something she could manage in that moment. She had her hands clasped in front of her, and she was looking at the floor and breathing. Just breathing, working through the specific internal experience of having been right about something that mattered when you could not have been certain you were right. She heard Crane's voice from somewhere near the petitioner's table, low, quick, directed at his lawyer, and looked up. Crane was watching her. Not with the dismissive assessment he had given her in the yard the day he rode in. Something different. The recalculation that had been happening at his table during William's testimony had arrived somewhere. And wherever it had arrived, it was legible on his face. He knew the folder of records had come from somewhere. He knew the water system had been built on information that hadn't come from anyone on that ranch before Clara Whitmore arrived. He knew that the argument Fletcher was running was too clean, too well organized, to have been assembled without someone who understood how arguments were assembled. He looked at her, and she looked back, and neither of them said anything. And then he looked away. That was enough. That was... In fact, the moment she had been waiting for, the one she had told William she wanted to see. Not triumph for its own sake. Just the recognition that the thing she had brought to this place, the thing no one in Harlan Creek had ever bothered to see, her mind, her specific and careful way of understanding how systems worked and what they were hiding, had mattered. Had changed something. Had changed everything. Court reconvened. Judge Hartwell took 12 minutes. He entered the 1,867 records as precedent. Found that the private water rights were clearly and legally established, and determined that the county had no jurisdictional basis to compel regulated pricing on privately held rights. He noted specifically that the rights holder had already voluntarily extended access to affected ranchers, which demonstrated the kind of community responsibility that made compelled regulation unnecessary. He dismissed Crane's petition. Crane's lawyer stood and made a brief statement about appeal rights. Hartwell acknowledged it with the expression of a man who has heard the word appeal many times and views it with appropriate equanimity. The gavel came down. The room did not erupt. This was not that kind of room. But it changed the specific change of a space where tension has been held for a long time releasing. The collective exhale of people who had come in uncertain about how this ended and now knew. Roy put his hand briefly on Clara's shoulder. She put her hand over his for a moment. Then William was coming through the room toward her. Moving through the people who were standing now, several of whom tried to speak to him. Two of whom he stopped briefly to acknowledge, before continuing. He reached her. He was not smiling. He was something more serious than smiling, the expression of a man who has done a difficult thing, and it has gone right, and he is still in the process of taking that in. "It's done," Clara said. "It's done," he said. They looked at each other in the middle of the Harlan Creek Town Hall, with half the county around them. And something passed between them that was not for the room, just for them. Just the specific understanding of two people who have been through something together and know what it cost and what it built. "Let's go home," she said. The word landed between them with its full weight. Home. She had said it without planning to, the way she had crossed the street 3 months ago without planning to. The way certain things happen when you have finally stopped arranging yourself around other people's expectations and started moving from your own center. William looked at her. "Yes," he said, "let's." The ride back to Carter Ranch was the quietest of the many quiet rides Clara had taken on that road. Roy drove, same as always, with the steady, unhurried competence he brought to everything. And the valley came into view over the ridge the way it always did, that first sight of the green and the river and the cattle in the far pasture. And this time, Clara did not try to manage her reaction to it. She let it arrive. She let it be what it was. 3 days after the court decision, Harlan Creek changed the way it spoke about Carter Ranch. Not dramatically, there was no public announcement. No formal revision. Small towns don't work that way. They shift in the way water shifts, gradually, by degrees, following the new contour of the land. The story people told about Carter Ranch became the true story instead of the assumed one. And as the true story spread, Clara's name became part of it in ways she had not orchestrated and had not expected. Abigail Henderson mentioned in the course of her regular marketing that the underground water had been found by the woman working up at Carter's. This became, in the retelling, the woman who found the water that saved the valley. Pete Marsh told it differently, told it with the specific additional detail that she had been present in the yard when he arrived with his Fing herd. That she had been the first person to ask directly and practically about his cattle. That she had sent Eli to show his men the channel without making him ask for it. People talked. Clara was unavoidable in the talking. She was in the kitchen on a Wednesday morning when her mother arrived at Carter Ranch for the first time. Not James this time. Dolores Whitmore herself in her good visiting dress. Driving the family wagon with a straightness of posture that was partly dignity and partly the particular bravado of someone who is doing something difficult and has decided to do it well. Clara saw her from the kitchen window and came outside. Her mother stepped down from the wagon. They stood in the yard. "I brought preserves," her mother said. She was holding a jar. She held it out. Clara took it. "Thank you," she said. Her mother looked at the barn, at the house, at the yard, at its organization. The specific functional order of a working place, managed by someone who understood both the work and the order. "You did this," her mother said. "William did most of it before I arrived," Clara said. "I reorganized some things." Her mother looked at her. "Clara," she said, "I need to say something." "You don't have to." "I know I don't have to," her mother said, with a flash of the familiar sharpness that was just the other side of her particular kind of love. "I'm saying it because it's true." She paused. "I was wrong. About what you were worth, about what I said in front of the town." Her voice was steady. But it cost something. Clara could see it costing. "I was wrong, and I'm sorry, And I don't need you to tell me it's all right. I just needed to say it. Clara held the jar of preserves and looked at her mother. She thought about a woman with a fan who had said give her away in the flat casual voice of someone who had thought the same thing privately. So many times the thought had lost its cruelty before it reached the air. She thought about years of small corrections and measured silences and the particular loneliness of a daughter who understands that her mother loves her and has also, her whole life, been ashamed of her. She thought about what it cost a woman like Dolores Whitmore to drive a wagon to a place she had never been and stand in a yard and say I was wrong. It's not all right, Clara said. Her mother nodded once. Accepting this. But I believe you, Clara said. And I'm glad you said it. Her mother looked at her for a long moment. Then she said, he's a good man. I know, Clara said. Your father is going to need some time. Papa can take whatever time he needs, Clara said. I'm not going anywhere. She heard her own words and understood them fully, as she said them not as a statement about her father, but as a statement about herself, about where she was and what she had built here, and what she intended. She was not going anywhere. Her mother stayed for 2 hours. She sat at the kitchen table and had coffee, and William came in at noon and was courteous and genuine in the particular way he was genuine with everyone. And Dolores Whitmore watched him the way a woman watches a man she is reassessing. And when she left, she held Clara's hand for a moment in the yard, just held it. Briefly, without saying anything, and then she got back in her wagon and drove back toward Harlot Creek. Clara stood in the yard until the wagon was over the ridge. Then she went back to work. The summer ended. The drought broke in late September, not catastrophically. Not in the way that causes damage, but in the slow, merciful way of a long-held tension releasing, the rains coming in gradual progression. The river rising back to its proper level, the grass returning to the color it was supposed to be. The cattle that had come through Carter Ranch during the worst of it went back to their own pastures. Heavier than they had arrived, better than they would have been. Roy said at breakfast one morning, Marsh stopped me in town. Wanted me to tell you he's grateful. Tell him he's welcome, Clara said. I told him he could tell you himself, Roy said. He said he would. When he's ready, Clara said. When he's ready, Roy agreed. Holt said a week after that. Over the account books, which he now reviewed alongside Clara as a matter of established practice. You know what Marsh's man Jenkins told me? Clara looked up. He said the Whitmore woman saved their whole herd, Holt said. He said it flatly, factually, in the Holt manner that held no embellishment, and therefore held no diminishment. Said that without the channel access, they'd have lost 40%. Clara looked at the account books. We built the channel, she said. William built the channel. You found the water, Holt said. She said nothing. I'm saying it because it's accurate, Holt said. In the voice of a man who considers accuracy a moral value. And because I said some things near the corral fence your first week here that were not accurate. And I don't owe you an apology for being cautious. But I owe you an acknowledgement of being wrong. Clara looked at him. Holt looked at the account books. The quarterly figures are correct, he said. For the first time in 3 years. I know, she said. Good, he said. That was the whole of it, and it was sufficient. October came in cool and clear, the light changing the way it does in Montana when summer finally relents, going golden and long-shadowed and honest in the way that summer's brightness isn't always honest. Clara had been at Carter Ranch for 4 months. She had stopped counting weeks and started counting seasons. Which was how you knew a place had become yours. William asked her on an October evening. Not in the kitchen, not at the table where they had sat through accounts and arguments and revelations. He asked her on the porch of the house, where they had taken to sitting in the evenings when the day's work was done. In the 2 chairs that Roy had moved out there sometime in August, without explanation, and which had been there ever since. He did not ask her the way a wealthy man proposes to the woman who saved his ranch. He did not ask her the way gratitude performs itself as love. He asked her the way he said most things plainly. Directly, without decoration, with full knowledge of the weight of the words. "Clara," he said. She was looking at the dark line of the ridge against the sky. "I know what I'm asking," he said. "I know what it means to you. I know what it has meant your whole life, to feel like something being arranged rather than someone making a choice. I know you said yes in that hallway because it was true, and not for any other reason. And I know the difference." He paused. "I'm asking you now, clearly, as a man who loves you and who has been changed by knowing you, whether you would choose to build this life with me. Not the ranch, not the valley me, the actual person sitting in this chair." Clara was quiet for a moment. She thought about a Saturday morning in the summer. A joke made in a public street, a bag she had packed without knowing why. She thought about a bench outside a general store, and eyes that held no pity. She thought about biscuits on a kitchen table, and a sick calf standing on its fourth day, and a bore well hitting water at 22 feet, and a folder of records organized in argument order, and a hallway in the dark, and two people saying the true thing to each other at last. She thought about what she really knew, not hoped. Not assumed, but knew from evidence accumulated across 4 months of pressure and work and honesty about who this man was. She turned and looked at him. "Yes," she said, "I choose you." Specifically, the actual person in the chair. She held his gaze. "And I need you to know that I am not saying yes to the valley, or the ranch, or the water rights, or what the county thinks about me now. I am saying yes because you knocked on my door the night before the hardest day and said the true thing instead of waiting for a better moment. And because you told the alderman's story in a courtroom full of people who had dismissed you for 15 years. And because you made sure a 12-year-old girl was explained things directly." She paused. "That is who I am choosing. Is that clear?" He was looking at her with the full expression, the one she had first seen on the evening after the county meeting. "Open and arrive," he said. "Good," she said. He reached across the space between the chairs and took her hand. His hand was calloused and sure, and he held hers the way he did most things, without excess. Without performance, with complete intention. They sat on the porch while the October dark settled over the valley. And the ranch was quiet around them, and the river ran at its proper level. And somewhere in the east pasture 800 cattle moved through grass that was green again. Clara Whitmore had walked into a street joke 4 months ago, with a bag she had packed for reasons she couldn't name. And she had crossed 20 yards of dirt road toward a man the whole town had dismissed. And she had said, "I am not property to be given or traded. And I have something to offer, and I know what I am worth." She had been right on all 3 counts. The world does not give women like Clara Whitmore their due easily, or quickly, or without requiring them to earn it 5 times over in ways that men are simply asked to do once. It does not look at a woman who is large and young and uncelebrated and say, "Here is someone worth knowing." It makes her prove it. It makes her reorganize the barn and save the calf and find the water and fix the books and drive to town and face her mother and sit beside a lawyer and tell the truth in a courtroom and do it all without the assurance that any of it will be seen. Clara had done all of it, not to be seen, because it was true to who she was. And in the end, the valley saw her anyway, not because she demanded it, not because she performed it, but because a woman who knows what she is worth and acts from that knowledge is not. Ultimately, invisible she cannot be. What is real always surfaces. What is true always holds. Clara Whitmore had walked across a street as someone the world had decided was worth nothing. And she had built out of early mornings and hard work and honest words and the specific courage of a person who keeps going when there is no guarantee of arrival, a life that was entirely, finally and completely her own. That was not the end of her story. It was the moment her story finally began.